This is our last session today, and we are moving on to a fireside chat with Len DeCandia and Edmund Zagorin. And I couldn't be more excited. The combined years of procurement experience with these two is over 50 years. And they're two of the most influential, globally recognized thought leaders in procurement. So we're real excited to have them with us today. Len comes to us. He has over 25 years of experience as a chief supply chain officer and chief procurement officer, and most recently from Johnson & Johnson. And Edmund is our co-founder, and again, comes with such depth of knowledge and extensive background in network analysis, auction theory, and of course, game theory, and certainly going to bring some exciting conversation to the meeting here today. Welcome. Are you both out there?
I'm here, Caroline, and just my last name is like Leonardo DiCaprio. It's DeCandia, so
love it.
Makes it easier for you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, and I definitely know Leo DiCaprio.
Actually, my first name is Leonardo, but only my mother calls me that now. So
I love it. Fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. Edmund, I'm going to start with a question for you. I'm going to start with, how does Arkestro's game theoretic approach work for single or sole source procurement?
Yeah, Caroline, thanks for the question. You know, I think there's a preconceived understanding of what procurement does when, we create value with suppliers and ask for better offers. And that preconceived notion has to do with, hey, we've got multiple suppliers, we're going to ask them for bids or quotes, and we're going to use that competitive dynamic to create value. And I think while that is one game theoretic approach, it doesn't work that well, or it can be constrained. There's only one supplier, or the supplier you work with knows that it's very hard to change. If the spec is very technical, if the end is very complex, these are all things that we hear. And so what Arkestro does is we use a technique called suggested offers. And this really takes advantage of the anchoring effect, but it also fundamentally operates on this paradigm of making it easier for your suppliers to give you a great offer and just making it less work for their sales team. And so if we think of one model as, what we've heard from Jim Walton from Magna earlier, which I loved this comparison of kind of the old world and the new world. We used to say, hey, we need to withhold our agreement or approval from suppliers in order to extract economic concessions. And for strategic suppliers, that just doesn't play, because we need to be aligned with them. We need to have a trusting and collaborative relationship. And so the Arkestro approach with suggested offers is really more, hey, let's exchange predictability in your sales cycle for value in the relationship. And we'll give you faster cycles and more predictability in exchange for value. And we'll do that at scale. And so we really think of this as a game theoretic approach that, rather than working for, in the Kraljic matrix, what's sometimes called leverage spend, which is spend where there's abundant suppliers and it's easy to change and it's easy to bid, for more strategic suppliers, which is for those that work in manufacturing or have complex technical industries, we see this as an unlock to help procurement go into areas of spend that might have had really challenging requirements for other processes.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Edmund, for that. Okay, Len, I've got a good one for you. Okay. How do you approach test and learn partnerships as part of procurement's overall digital transformation? What are the benefits and risks compared with longer tech employments that we've seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to, congratulate some of the case studies that were presented on the call here. I think it's great when people have the courage to really go and make those types of investments. I'll talk to my experience. I grew up in a world of heavy investment with big ERP systems as either a CSO and CPO, and I just retired this past year as the global CPO at Johnson & Johnson and led a digital transformation. I love cloud-based technology because it's much more agile. And it really gives you an opportunity to be able to experiment. But most importantly, I think the function has really always been put in a harvest perspective. So people would come to me or my team from the business side and say, hey, I need savings, go harvest me some savings. They weren't used to a function like ours showing up and saying, hey, we'd like some investment, because that investment is really going to give us an opportunity to really expand our ability to contribute to the P&L of the organization. And so we started during my tenure what we call the procurement garage. And so we would work with companies like Arkestro and others and do a best-in-class type of approach to test and learn. Find one specific area in the business where we could go very, very deep, but then use that business case to go back to the business partners and to the financial community and fundamentally say, hey, look, this isn't a hope or a wish. This is a reality. And most importantly, you can scale. And I heard that from some of your earlier presenters. And what we saw was just an incredible transformation during that period by being able to do that. The team is still doing it today, and they're really have the ability to contribute quicker and more effectively. So test and learn is really the way to go. It's part of this reframing of the function into being more strategic and into the ability of being able to add to the organization's P&L success.
Fantastic. Oh, I love the concept of a garage. So that was great. Thank you for that insight. Okay, Edmund, back over to you. How is a suggested offer approach different from bidding or sourcing?
Well, I think if you look at what used to be called the 7-step sourcing process that was developed by the firm A.T. Kearney back in the day, you'd look at steps like understanding your category, understanding the supply base, seeing the optionality, and then often run through a long listing to short list process, get offers, negotiate them, and then award the business. And I would say that a lot of procurement professionals that grew up with that approach are used to some version of that when it comes to bidding and sourcing. And what Predictive Procurement Orchestration does is it really turns that process on its head. It asks the question, what is your desired outcome before you even begin the process of communicating with suppliers? And this is really important for companies that go to the same suppliers over and over again. Because let's face it, if you've been doing business in a certain way over a number of years, the suppliers are going to anticipate your approach. And the best way to get ahead of that is to anticipate their response. Now, the other thing I would say is in a Six Sigma or a lean standpoint, one of the incredibly powerful things that procurement can do, it's not just doing digital transformation, but change management more holistically, is to look at a process and say, like, where's the time going? Like, all of the time we spend doing a process with suppliers, how much time are we spending on each step? And what we found, and this is something that Ben Lakin mentioned earlier, and I'm so glad that he highlighted this, is that for many companies, the 2 steps that consume most of the time are the step where you ask for an offer from suppliers, and the supplier then has to spend time reviewing a spec and preparing the offer, and then the time that procurement spends reacting to that offer. And a lot of that time, quite frankly, is spent cleaning up errors, moving data into the right place, maybe creating pivot tables against a benchmark. There's just a tremendous amount of manual work that goes into getting to a common understanding of what's being offered against the spec so that you can negotiate. And what we found with Arkestro, the suggested offer process, and what makes it transformative, is that it actually eliminates these 2 steps entirely. Because with a suggested offer, the supplier doesn't have to spend time creating or inputting data into a format. They can actually review and agree with something that's presented to them. And then because this has been created with a bunch of checks in place in advance, it's kind of like TSA pre-check, where because it's already understood that this is within the zone of acceptability, there's less analysis that then has to be done on the back end. So it really turns the process on its head kind of fundamentally. But what we like about it is that for companies that like to do procurement events, sourcing events, bidding events, it makes that process much more efficient as well. But that additional process isn't necessarily required if it's not appropriate for the supplier relationship, because we know that the supplier relationship is so important for companies like manufacturing companies that operate a physical supply chain or operate in a regulated or technical market area.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Len, back to you. We have a question. If you were a CPO today of a manufacturing company and you were discussing the concept of a field trial or a test, how would you justify it from a tangible business value standpoint?
Yeah, and that's perfect. I think it goes back to the previous question. I think when I was running the function, whether it was supply chain or procurement, you're always being asked to do more with less. And I would go to the procurement team and I'd say, we've got to find more savings. And they would come back and they say, well, I need 3 more heads, or I need this. And it was always difficult to be able to build that business case. And so, we migrated towards building and reframing the value of the function to the business. I work closely with our CFO and got great support from our executive committee. And I said, the value of the function is really like anything else in business. It's an ROI approach. So you have to look at the savings contribution. You also have to look at procurement's ability to deliver cash. And in today's world, cash is really, really important because the cost of capital is very different today than it was pre-pandemic. And I also looked at supplier and supplier innovation. And I like some of the comments that your most recent presenters from Arkestro talked about relative to the importance of supplier relationship management. So it's not about go beat up the supplier, get the best price. We learned through the pandemic that if you did that, how you treated your supplier before the pandemic was a direct correlation to how they treated you during the pandemic. And living in a world now of more scarcity, so those relationships become super important. So I just talked about the numerator, and I looked at the cost of the function as kind of the denominator. And here's where enabling tools like Arkestro become significant, right? Because what it does is it basically says, if I make this investment in technology without adding more headcount, but giving my organization to do a couple of things. One, obviously drive savings, but 2, do it faster. So, we usually forecast savings for the year, and then we say, well, we're only going to realize it in the 3rd quarter or the 4th quarter. Imagine if you can realize it halfway through the 1st quarter, right? And the second piece of all of that is it really has a contribution to cash flow, which is super, super important. And so what this does, it frees up the organization's time to go to other areas of the business. And one of your previous presenters did a great job of talking about an area that I think procurement and procurement professionalism can have a significant impact. And that's what we would traditionally call indirect, right? So now if you have a tool that allows you to deal with your supplier base and deal with your internal budget owners, who usually look at procurement as bureaucrats who take too much time to get things done, but you actually can bring to them insights on the markets where they're buying from, and you can get them up and running on a contract a lot faster without going through some long extended RFP process. You're going to make a lot of friends in those businesses because you're going to help them be successful. You're going to enable their success. In my 7-year tenure at J&J, we increased procurement's productivity by 70%. So 70% better contribution ROI, right? And we also increased our influence. What do I say by that? We were able to get into areas like R&D, IT spend. And so when I initially started that assignment, we were maybe influencing about $18 billion of J&J spend. When I left at the end of last year, we're influencing all $40 billion. So that's taking procurement and making it strategic, but enabling it with technology and reframing the value of a procurement professional to your internal business partner, because you're bringing market insights, you're bringing speed, agility. You're not showing up and saying, I love what was said a few minutes ago. I'm not coming to you with the best price. I'm coming to you with the best value. I'm going to look at all of these dimensions, and I have the ability to understand the market that you're playing in and bringing you all these insights while you're busy running your business. I think if you aren't doing this, and if your CPOs either on this call or CPOs that you report to aren't having these conversations with you and with their peers in the business, it's an incredible missed opportunity, because we're talking about competitive advantage here and the ability for procurement to start doing some fun things.
Yes, absolutely. Len, wow, that was the results you're talking about with Johnson & Johnson are just incredible. So appreciate you sharing those insights.
My pleasure.
Okay, and Edmund, back to you. Why do certain suppliers prefer Arkestro to a customized back and forth offer process?
I think it's actually something I want to double click on from what Len said. And this is a conversation we've had with chief procurement officers, chief supply chain officers, but also CFOs, which is, let's imagine just for a second that there's $1 million savings number, and you as the procurement team could negotiate that. But you don't have as many people and you're limited by the number of hours in a day. And you could deliver that, say, in Q3 or Q4 versus Q1. The incremental cost of delay associated with that savings is, 1 out of 12, so 12%. Think of it, 2 out of 12 is close to 25%, right? Like, so the amount that eats in, it's actually $80,000 on $1 million, the cost of delay of just delaying 30 days. And what's interesting about that is that savings recognition, and when you recognize savings, is such a powerful lever in terms of driving impact. And that's actually something to realize on the sales side too. So when you look at why suppliers like Arkestro, it's not that complicated, right? They like Arkestro because they can get through the procurement process faster. And what that means for them is they have more predictability into their sales, more predictability into their business, and they're able to pass some of that value back to their customers through this process. And so for a long time, again, the procurement friction was designed to be very control oriented. Hey, we need controls on spend management, right? Let's slow the process down. Let's make sure it's harder for our company to spend money than it is for us to make money. Ideally, it was a lot of CFOs how they thought about it. But the reality is that if you can give your suppliers greater predictability, regardless of when the cash goes in and out of the business, right? That's a business question with payment terms and so on. But you really can create great supplier relationships. The sales team's happy. They get to go through the procurement process with a minimum of manual data entry and all of this rigmarole. And it's just an improved quality of life, especially if they're a supplier that deals with you more frequently. The last thing I'll mention, just as a nod to something that Catherine said earlier. So, we're super excited with some of the great suggestions our customers have given us. And one learning that we've had was that, suppliers don't want, in many cases, another app, another profile, another portal, another system. And so one of the innovations that the product team at Arkestro has really brought to that supplier experience is enabling an in-email workflow, a workflow that lives in your supplier's inbox. It's simple, it's easy, it's in a lot of ways, it's like DocuSign. There's a button in an email and they can kind of get through that. And so we've heard from suppliers that's something they really appreciate. Hey, don't make me learn something new, right? Every customer's got something different. And so it's just the easy button for the sales team on the supplier side.
Absolutely. Okay, we have one last question, Len, and we'll wrap up with this, and it kind of wraps into what Edmund was just talking about. But what do you say to procurement teams when they say that they could have done this by themselves, or that they could do this by themselves?
Yeah, and I think that's really an important question. I think it's how, right? And so if you're thinking about how you're spending your time and where you're spending your time and where you'd like to be spending your time, I think what you need to look at is if this work can be done and it allows you and frees you up to get into more strategic areas doing your work, and also it allows you to put points on the board a lot faster. Think about we talked a little bit about supplier relationship management, and let's talk about the world we live in today. I think the number one issue, I said number two, because there's always going to be cost, but the number two issue for procurement professionals today is resilience, the ability to continue to keep your product flowing, keep your services flowing in a world where we're going through significant change, in a world where we're dealing with the diversification of supply chains and so on. So I would say, and let me, I'll be honest, procurement people have been whining to me for 30 years. I want to see at the table. I want to see at the table. Well, you've got to create that opportunity. So if you can invest in tools that allow you to be more effective and efficient and free up your time to better understand your markets, your business partner needs, and your ability to be there early in the process, your ability to be there to create and to deliver next generation innovation, that is a lot more fun, trust me, than running RFPs and RFIs, right? And so it's time. You can never get that back. So if you can do things faster, quicker, you got it. And it's your ability to free up your time. And let me tell you, I missed a lot of back to school nights and whatever else, right? But also free up your time to do more strategic and more exciting work. Why wouldn't you do this? And that's what I saw with my team over the past 10 years with digital transformation. I mean, we were able to get into areas around sustainability and be extremely effective, supplier diversity, innovation, working with suppliers to launch new products. As an example, we were one of 2 or 3 companies to put a qualified and a valid COVID vaccine in the market in 12 months. And we ran the world's largest clinical trial through working with a supplier using artificial intelligence technology. It's exciting. It's a lot of pressure, but that's a lot more fun to do than run your traditional RFP. It takes courage. If I spent the past 10 or 12 years of my career being a hero running RFPs, why would I do this? On the other side, really, don't you want to transform your time, your function, and your ability to do more exciting work? It's a great time to be a procurement professional. I tell Edmund all the time, I wish I were 30 years younger. I love it. Building on this incredible enabling capabilities, and the function is super powerful as an enabling function. The hero is your internal business partner, your supplier, right? Remember, they're the hero in all this. You're enabling incredible success.